Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at how to improve creative writing. Now specifically this is going to be designed for anyone who is studying GCSE English. Specifically we're going to focus on paper 1, question 5. And what we're really going to zoom in on here is understanding the key techniques that you need in order to be successful within the assessment. If you haven't done so already, please could you like and subscribe, it really does help us out when you do so. So first thing to do is just have a look at the Scrabble tiles. It's a quick, easy game to play now, just to get us in the mindset for creative writing and start us thinking a little bit about the importance of words as well. So we're going to play a little bit of a different game to the way it normally plays Scrabble. So the first thing I'd like you to do is try and make as many words as you can using the tiles. Add up the score for your longest word, and the final one, use the words you've identified to predict the focus of today's lesson. So another thing to bear in mind, this is a little bit different from traditional Scrabble. So for the teacher's top tip, you can use each Scrabble tile as many times as you like. So the idea of the game is that you come up with the biggest word possible. It's just a quick, easy little task just to get you thinking and trying to get you to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more switched on. Now if you want to pause the video here and spend a little bit of time and go through it yourself, please feel free to do so. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at the ones that I actually was thinking about, and that might give us a bit of an indication about what we're doing in the rest of the lesson. The class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So here were the ones that I was thinking of. So you can see there we've got Christmas, we've got home, and we've got robbery. A good thing to think about as well is what kind of film might we be focusing on today. So the reason why we're looking at a specific film is because an important detail to remember within your actual creative writing is that you don't have to be 100% original in what you produce. You can be inspired or even allude, which means to basically hint or make a reference to a film or a book. So what we need to think about here is not that you need to write something that's the most original, thought-provoking piece of creative writing in the world. What we really need to focus on now is developing the techniques to make sure we can get a pass. So within this lesson, you should be able to recall the key language techniques needed for question 5, understand what makes an effective response, and apply your understanding to an exam style question. So the first thing we're going to look at here is going to be one of the key ways to remember some of our language techniques, and the way we do this is through Go Massive techniques. So Go Massive is an acronym that can be used to help remember the key techniques. So each one of the letters in this acronym stands for a key technique that can be used to help improve your writing. So if you're not too sure what all of these mean, please do use the clues below to try and work them out for yourself. So if you've done a bit of creative writing before, you will have heard of at least some of these, but it's important to try and think about how you can use the acronym and actually apply it to your own understanding and therefore use it within the assessment. So first thing to think about, clue 1. So this is when words sound like the noise they make. Clue number 2. This technique uses like or as to make a comparison. Clue number 3. This technique is about choosing the most interesting word. Okay, so if you haven't seen Go Massive before, then it's a really helpful acronym to use. It's very similar to DeForest that you'd use in paper 2 as well. Now if you want to pause the video here and take your time and go through it, then please feel free to do so. We're now going to jump ahead and go through the answers in the next part of the video. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So here we have at the top of our sheet then we have Go Massive, which is the acronym we're going to use for paper 1 question 5. The first technique that we're going to be talking about is a group of 3. Now if you haven't heard of this before, it's also referred to as a triplet. So this is where you have 3 key ideas or 3 main points that all work towards a common goal. The next one is onomatopoeia, and that was one of the hints that we had on the previous part of the video. So onomatopoeia is when you use sounds that actually sound like the noise that they're making. So bang, crash, things like that would be typical onomatopoeia words. Next one is a metaphor. So a metaphor is when you say something is something else. We're using figurative language and we're not being literal. The next one is alliteration. So alliteration is when we're repeating the same letter 2 or more times in close conjunction with each other, and this often helps to give our writing a little bit more emphasis, a little bit more of a almost like underlining the word or putting it in bold. It kind of gives it a bit more focus in the actual writing. The next one is a simile, so very similar to a metaphor, the only difference being that we use like or as. The next one is sensory language. Now, if you happen to watch our previous video on creative writing, we did a whole video going through sensory language. So if you're not too sure about what we mean by that, please do check out our previous video that goes into it in more depth. The I is imagery. Now, imagery is what you get when you just create a visual stimulus for the reader. You actually help to create an image in the reader's mind. V is varied vocabulary. Now, this for me is going to be one of the most important things to include in creative writing. If you're using certain words that aren't particularly effective or adjectives that don't really convey what you're trying to convey, then it's really going to affect your mark in the long run. And the final one, emotive language. So this is where you can actually get an emotional response from the reader. So think about the kind of language you can use to have that reaction from whoever's reading your piece of work. Another thing to think about is to try and stretch and challenge yourself. So what other techniques can you include in your writing? So this doesn't include every single language technique that will be helpful in your writing. These are just a few that will help you to actually make sure that you get at least a 4 or even a 5 within your assessment. When it comes to actually planning your response as well, I'm not a big believer in a plan because you don't get any additional marks for it. However, it can be helpful to go massive down the side of your page. Hopefully by the point that you actually go and do your assessment, you know all of these off by heart. So you don't have to have them all written down like this. You could literally just have the acronym Go Massive written down the side of your page and tick them off each time you've used the technique. And the important thing to note is that even though these techniques are really important, we're not looking at chucking all of them in and just having it all techniques and no actual plot or no description or anything like that. So you want to try and use a range of these ones, okay? You don't want to use things like 8 similes and no other techniques, because then the examiner is going to think that you only know how to use that one method. Okay, so think about practicing with a few of these techniques, think about mixing them up, and just try to get used to using a range of them naturally as you write your response. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to think about the kind of thing you can do to actually be inspired by a popular Christmas film and actually try to use those ideas to write your own version. Okay, so if you are interested in looking into this, you can watch a clip there of Home Alone, and the way to find it, you can go onto YouTube and you just type in the Wet Bandits plan, and it comes up with a kind of introduction to them planning to rob the house. So once you've done that, it'll be important to think about the following challenges. So firstly, how would it feel to be that young and left home alone? Now, if we're going to write a version like this kind of film, then you're going to have to be the actual main character. So we'll be writing in first person, and the actual person within the story is very young. So you have to kind of try to imagine what it's like to be in that kind of mental headspace as well. The super challenge then would be to list 3 or more adjectives to describe how it would feel. And then the mega challenge, we're going to look at a student response and mark it against the success criteria of our own. Okay, so what we're going to look at now then is a student has actually thought about this kind of film and they've tried to write down their own creative response to go alongside it. Okay, and that's absolutely fine. You can still do that in the exam, because the main thing we're thinking about when it comes to your assessment is, are you able to use the techniques that we've talked about, and do you have a good range of spelling, grammar and punctuation within your writing. Look at the student response and use the success criteria to mark it. So this is the same response that we're thinking about, where someone has actually been inspired by something they've seen and they've tried to write their own creative response. So it says then, a shiver of fear went over me as I saw the big shadow outside the window. I felt really scared and I knew that something bad was about to happen. As fast as a donkey I ran down the hallway and locked the front door. Back in my bedroom, I felt my heart race as I inched open the window to listen to the people outside. Their dark clothing made them stand out like a sinister stain on a white blanket of snow. Forcing my ears to pick up their words, I felt my heart pulse in a really scary way. We'll come back about 9 o'clock. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at our own success criteria, and we're going to see how many marks this would actually be awarded. So typical things to look out for when you are marking someone's response will be things like this. So has the response been written in full sentences? That might seem like it's quite an obvious and straightforward point, but again, we just need to make sure that the basic level of English and of literacy are actually being followed through. Number two, the responses used a range of sensory language examples. So we're thinking about our Go Massive techniques as well. Sensory language has been one that we're focusing on quite heavily in the last few videos. Next one, the responses used a range of interesting adjectives. This also feeds into the use of varied vocabulary as well, thinking about have they actually selected the best word to create really effective imagery for the reader, or could it maybe be improved in some aspects or another. And the final one, the responses used a range of Go Massive techniques. Now this is actually the same kind of terminology that you would find within the mark scheme. They have things like some or a range, and what you hope for is a range of techniques. Now they're quite vague with how many techniques we mean when we mean a range, so use your best kind of judgment for how many you think they're referring to when they say that. Class feedback. Check your answers against the teacher's feedback. So we have the same response there on the left hand side, and here are a few comments that was actually made by the teacher when it was handed in to be marked. So the first thing we're going to think about is what went well, so things that have made this response quite successful. So the responses use some examples of Go Massive techniques. Now the problem with this, even though this is pointing out some of the positive things that have been included in the response, is this word some. Now some actually implies that it hasn't used a lot. Some normally refers to the fact that it's used a few. So if we look at it there, one of the Go Massive techniques that stands out to me quite a bit would be they've got a sinister stain, which is alliteration. And if you're thinking a little bit more complicated, we're thinking about sibilance as well. And it says there's a white blanket of snow. Well, it's not literally a blanket of snow, so therefore they have used a metaphor in it there as well. They've used a few examples of sensory language. We've got a nice little description to start us off here at the start. So a shiver of fear went over me. Of course, that would be something that we feel, and we've all experienced this, so it's quite effective imagery as well. As fast as a donkey, I ran down the hallway. Now this is a simile because it's used as or like. The only issue with this is that it hasn't really been fully developed. So donkeys aren't typically something we associate as being fast. The next thing, the candidate has started to vary their vocabulary. And EBI, the response needs to improve on their spelling and grammatical mistakes. And if we actually have a look at it, they've made a lot of mistakes referring to some homophones as well. So these are words like new, which is spelled with an N instead of a K, and also way as well at the end. And there's some more examples as well that I'm sure you can find. If you're going to make some common errors as well, these are things that are going to penalise you quite heavily as well when it comes to creative writing. And the final one, the response needs to use showing and not telling. So where it's actually said I felt really scared, don't just tell us you feel scared, try and actually physically describe that sensation and describe how it feels to be within that moment and to feel that fear, and actually develop the description just a little bit more. Using everything we have covered so far, attempt the creative writing challenges. So first thing we're going to think about here is, can you try to write the opening of a story in which you are home alone? So again, we're going to try and take a little bit of inspiration from the ideas we've seen earlier and try to apply them to our own writing. Then if you could attempt the super challenge, try to use a range of Go Massive techniques in your response. Again, think about what we mean when we actually talk about a range and the kind of level of quality of your writing and the amount of techniques that are needed for that task. And in the mega challenge, what you're going to do now is you're going to see 6 different scenarios on the next part of the video. A good way to kind of get a little bit of practice and to make sure that you don't really have to focus too much on the plot is you can use something like a dice or a spinner to decide the next 2 events that occur in your story. And what this does, this just allows you to kind of focus a little bit less on actually what is happening on the story and actually start to think about how could you develop something and break down the description, because really when you get down to it, that is what's going to be the most important thing when it comes to the assessment. Also try and stretch and challenge yourself, so try and think about using advanced punctuation to increase your technical accuracy. So just to recap then, for the actual question 5 for paper 1, there's 40 marks available. You get 24 marks for the content, so that is actually what you're physically writing, the language techniques and the structural techniques you're using, and then we have 16 marks as well for the level of technical accuracy. So that is your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation, and how you've actually organised the writing as well. Paragraph 2. You can spin the dice or the wheel to determine what happens next in the story, or you can just decide to pick a number from 1 to 6 at random, and then you can use this idea to try and actually write your own piece of creative writing based on the scenario that we've been discussing. So first thing to think about then, for paragraph 2, if you went with number 1, you could go with a scenario such as this. You hear the sound of glass breaking and someone crying out an alarm. Describe what happens next. Number 2, you remember that you have left a window open downstairs. Write a sentence using a simile or metaphor to describe what you do next. Number 3, you make a trap on the stairs with old cans of paint and some rope. Write 2 or more sentences where you describe the thieves going up the stairs. Number 4, your brother has a tarantula in his room, but you have a serious fear of spiders. Use showing and not telling to describe how it feels when you get it out of its cage. Now, if you're not too sure what we mean when we talk about showing and not telling, this is where you'd say, rather than saying something like, I feel really scared about touching the spider, physically describe how it would feel to have that thing on your skin, and try and actually develop the description and really take your time and really try and think about how you can make it the most effective bit of description for the reader. Number 5, you use your collection of toy cars to trip up the intruders. Use sensory language to describe what happens when they step on them. And number 6, the thieves break into your house and take all of your Christmas presents. So if you are doing it with the spin or the dice, the basic kind of premise we're working with here is that 6 is not the one that you want. It's not going to be the best outcome. It's important, however, that you think about different scenarios and you try and think about how you can actually describe them and how you can make them quite interesting for the reader and help them actually get a lot out of your writing. Now, if you're ready to move on and you're ready to think about your third paragraph, we're going to have another 6 statements as well from which you can choose. So for paragraph 3 then, number 1, you hear the sounds of sirens in the distance and you cry out for help. Number 2, you hear the sirens but decide to set more traps for the intruders. Number 3, the police come but the intruders are nowhere to be seen. You get blamed for the state of the house. Number 4, you cover the intruders with feathers and glue. Desperate and defeated, they beg for your mercy. Number 5, it is late now. Snow is falling heavily as you try to summon the courage to go out of your bedroom window to the old zip line you made last summer. If you make it, you will finally be safe. And the final one then. In a panic, you slip on one of your own booby traps, fall headfirst down the stairs, and crush your family's Christmas tree. You wake up an hour later, the thieves are gone, and your family are not happy with you. So again, just as with the second paragraph there, number 6 is the one that's really not the best outcome either. But try experimenting with it, see what you can actually do when you're forced to write about something where you aren't in control of the plot, because that is quite similar to the scenario we get in the exam. We don't know what picture's going to come up, we don't know what situation you might be presented with, so you have to be used to getting that description down very, very quickly and just practice developing your skill and your craft with those different scenarios. Now, if you've actually managed to produce a piece of writing, then by all means you can send it through to us and we can give you some feedback. Alternatively, you can use this success criteria and you can use it to kind of judge how successful your response has been. Now, this is the same success criteria that we looked at when we looked at that first paragraph at the start of the video, and we're just thinking about the basic things you need to include to make sure you're going to get a reasonable mark in the assessment. So you can award your response 1 mark for each time the bullet points have actually been met within the writing. So first one would be, the response has been written in full sentences. It sounds like a very obvious thing, but when we're panicking, when we're stressed out, when we're trying to be as creative as possible, sometimes this gets neglected. The second one, the response has used a range of sensory language examples. Number 3, the response has used a range of interesting adjectives. And the final one, tying into what we've been focusing on largely within this video, the response has used a range of go massive techniques. Now, if you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added onto here every single week. Alternatively, you can leave us a comment below, like and subscribe, and we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. If you can't find anything that's helping you at the moment within this actual channel, please do check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much, guys, for listening. And again, if you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe. It really does help us out when you do so. Thanks for listening, and all the best with your work and your studies in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.